Barefoot on the Mercantile steps, Goldie Sims pressed her palm flat against the rough-hewn post and breathed through her nose the way she had taught herself to do when shame threatened to crack her open in public. The boards were warm under her soles, sun-baked and gritty with trail dust, and she was aware of every splinter in a way she hadn't been when she still owned shoes. That had been 41 days ago. She'd counted. Inside the Stonehollow Mercantile the air smelled of cured tobacco and flour sacks, of the particular iron-cool scent of a properly stocked dry goods store. Elmer Pratt stood behind the counter with both hands spread on the scarred wood, his expression not cruel exactly, but resolved, which was its own kind of cruelty. "I'm not running a charity, Mrs. Sims," he said, his voice easily through the open doorway. Two other women near the bolts of calico fabric glanced over without meaning to. One looked away quickly, the other held her gaze a moment longer than was kind. Goldie kept her chin level. She had practiced that too. "I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for credit. I had credit here before my husband died. You know that." Clarence had credit. Clarence is gone. Elmer straightened a tin of buttons on the counter that didn't need straightening. "I'm sorry for your loss, truly I am, but I can't carry an account with no man behind it. It ain't how things are done." She wanted to ask him how things were done for the children who hadn't eaten a proper meal in 2 days, wanted to ask what the going rate was for a woman's pride when she'd spent every last coin on a doctor's fee that hadn't saved anything. Instead she said, $4.20. "That's all I'm asking for. Cornmeal, salt pork, a tin of lard, enough to last the week." Elmer spread his hands wider, a gesture that was almost apologetic. "I can't do it. You bring in $4.20. I'll fill your basket myself." She stood there one moment longer than she needed to, long enough to make sure he understood she wasn't fleeing, she was choosing to leave. Then she turned and walked back through the open door and out onto the boardwalk, where the afternoon light was pitiless and flat and made everything look harder than it already was. She sat down on the top step, set her empty basket beside her, and pressed the back of her wrist to her mouth. Behind her, just inside the door where she'd left them, a pair of small boots sat side by side next to the flour sack she'd already known she couldn't buy. She'd told the children to wait inside out of the sun. She could hear, faintly, the younger ones humming, a shapeless little tune, the kind small children make without thinking about it, the kind that could undo a person if she let it. She didn't let it. She looked out at the street instead, at the wagon ruts and the hitching posts and the distant brown smudge of the territory that went on for so long, and so far it almost seemed like a promise of something. She was still looking when she heard the boots. Not the children's. These were a man's boots, a slow, unhurried tread on the boardwalk planks, coming from the direction of the livery. She didn't turn around. She heard him stop. Felt the slight shift of shadow across the step beside her, the way a person can feel another person's stillness when it is very deliberate. After a moment she looked up. He was tall in the way of men who don't know they are. A kind of height that hadn't been arranged on purpose, just accumulated. His coat was trail-dusted leather, his hat brim pulled low enough to shadow his eyes. He had a jaw that looked like it had been carved out of something unyielding and a mouth that was set in a line that wasn't stern so much as quiet. He was looking at her empty basket. He looked at it for what felt like a long time. Then he stepped past her, through the open door, into the Mercantile. She turned and watched. He set his hat on the counter. He did not say anything. He pulled a worn leather billfold from the inside of his duster, and he laid coins on the scarred wood, one at a time, each one placed with a kind of care that was almost deliberate, not the careless toss of a man with excess, but the measured setting down of a man who had counted his own coins often enough to know what they meant. Elmer Pratt watched the coins arrive. His expression shifted through several things it couldn't quite settle on. "What's this for?" Elmer asked. The man said, "Her bill." 2 words, flat and quiet and entirely without decoration. Elmer looked at the coins, looked at the man, looked through the doorway at Goldie, who had stood up without deciding to and was now gripping the post with both hands. "That's $4.40, Elmer said. "Fill the basket," the man said. "Keep the change for her next visit." There was a silence in the Mercantile that had weight to it. The two women near the calico had gone entirely still. Elmer Pratt picked up the coins. Goldie's knuckles were white around the post. She watched Elmer move through the store, the cornmeal, the salt pork, the lard, watched him fill the basket she had brought with the quiet competence of a man who had done this 10,000 times before. The basket grew heavy. She could see it from where she stood. The man turned and came back through the door. He picked up the basket from the step where she had left it, and he held it out to her. She didn't take it immediately. She looked at his face, what she could see of it, and tried to find something in it that would make sense of this moment, some angle or advantage she'd missed. There was nothing. His eyes, when she finally caught them under that hat brim, were a steady grey-green, and they held hers without demand. "Why?" she said. "It wasn't quite a question." He didn't answer. He held the basket a little further out toward her. She took it. The weight of it, the solid, real, meaningful weight of food, made her breath catch in a way she refused to show. "I can't repay you," she said. "I have to be honest about that." He shook his head, a small motion, as if repayment had never entered his mind as relevant. She heard, behind her, the sound of small boots on floorboards. The children appeared in the doorway, the younger one blinking in the afternoon light, the older pressing close to Goldie's side with the particular gravity of a child who has learned to read a room. The man looked at them. He looked at them the way he had looked at the basket, steadily, without performance. He reached into the pocket of his duster and produced a small paper twist. He crouched down, a fluid, unhurried movement for a man of his size, and held it out. The younger one leaned forward and then looked up at Goldie. Goldie nodded once. The child took the twist and unwrapped the corner, horehound candy, the amber-colored kind. The older child stood straight and didn't reach. So the man produced a second twist from the same pocket and held it out at their eye level and waited until it was taken before he stood again. He stood. He looked at Goldie. "Where are you staying?" he said. Still not quite a question, more like the beginning of a solution. She told him the truth, because there was no point in anything else. The old Harker claim, 4 miles out. "We've been sleeping in the root cellar since the house blew its roof in the spring. I keep meaning to." She stopped. She had been keeping meaning to for 41 days, and meaning to had not built anything. He was already looking at his horse, a compact, short-backed grey at the hitching post, trail-hardened and patient. He untied the reins and led it to her without speaking. Then he went back to the post and took down his saddlebags and checked something in them and rebuckled the flap with the clean economy of a man who didn't waste motion. He looked at her. He looked at the children. He looked at the road south. "I'll take you," he said. It was 4 words, and it cost her something to hear them, not because they were unkind, but because they were so plain and so real that they left her no place to hide her need. She had been hiding it for 41 days. She was so tired. "You don't know us," she said. "No," he agreed. He waited. She looked at the grey horse. She looked at her children. She picked up the basket and settled it on her arm and said, "All right," and felt the words rearrange something in her chest on the way out. He boosted the children up into the saddle one at a time, settling them with the same careful steadiness he'd shown with the coins, not rough, not impatient, just sure. He walked alongside. He gave Goldie his arm over the rough patch where the boardwalk dropped off into rutted dirt and said nothing about her feet on the stones. They were 2 miles south of Stonehollow, moving through the pale late afternoon light when the riders came. There were 3 of them, coming fast from the east along the cut-off trail, and Goldie's stomach turned to cold water when she recognized the one in front, Denton Yule. He had been to the Harker claim twice already since Clarence died, both times with papers he said were legal and a smile that wasn't. He had a claim on the land, he said, by way of a debt Clarence had owed him, which Goldie suspected was either fabricated or inflated beyond any honest number. She had no money to contest it and no man to stand in front of her and say it plainly. Yule pulled up 20 yards ahead. His two companions spread slightly to either side, the way men do when they want to box something in. "Mrs. Sims," Yule said, pleasantly, "looks like you found yourself a friend." The man beside Goldie had stopped walking. He had not moved in any dramatic way, no hand to his hip, no squaring of shoulders, but something had changed in how he occupied space. He stood between Goldie and the riders in a way that was complete and unhurried, as if he had simply calculated the geometry of the situation and positioned himself accordingly. "You'd be the hired help," Yule said, addressing him now. "I'd encourage you to move along. This is a property matter." The man said nothing. Yule's pleasant expression thinned slightly. "That claim is mine by right. The widow knows it. She can take what belongs to her and go wherever she's going, and I won't stop her, but the land stays." Goldie stepped forward, but the man put out his arm, not blocking her exactly, more like marking a line. He still hadn't spoken. He looked at Yule with the same steady grey-green patience he'd turned on everything else, and something in that patience was more unnerving than anger would have been. One of the flanking riders shifted in his saddle. The grey horse didn't move. "You got a name?" Yule asked. "Cassius Dane," the man said. Something moved through Yule's face. It was quick, barely there, but Goldie caught it. Recognition of some kind. Not fear, exactly, but its first cousin. "Dane," Yule repeated. "The deed's in her husband's name," Cassius said. "Survey office in Harlow has the copy. Debt claims go through probate. You know that." A pause. "You're going to let us pass?" It was not a request. It had the same flat quality as everything else he said. No heat, no threat, just a plain statement about what was going to happen next. Yule stared at him for a long moment. Then he pulled his horse's head around and rode back the way he'd come, and his two men followed without a word. Goldie let out a breath she had been holding since the riders appeared on the cutoff. Cassius looked at her. He seemed to be checking that she was all right, a quick inventory, the same way she checked the children after anything frightening, the instinct to account for everyone. "How did you know about the survey office?" she asked. "Stopped there this morning," he said. She stared at him. "You checked the deed before you ever came near the Mercantile." He didn't answer, but he didn't need to. He had known. He had come into Stonehollow, asked his quiet questions, found out what she was facing, not just the empty basket, but the land claim and the circling men and all of it. And then he had done exactly what the situation required. No announcement, no fanfare. Just the coins on the counter and the arm over the rough patch and the body placed between her and the men on the cut-off trail. She felt something she hadn't felt in 41 days, and it was so unfamiliar it took her a moment to name it. Safe. She felt for one breathing moment safe. The Harker claim looked worse in the fading afternoon than it did in the mornings when she could still pretend the day might fix things. The house stood with its roof half gone, the raw joists exposed to the sky, the interior open to weather. The root cellar was cool and dry, but it was still a root cellar. Cassius walked the property once, the perimeter, the structure, the well. He did it in the same unhurried way he did everything, hands in his pockets, taking stock. When he was done, he went to his saddlebags and came back with tools she hadn't expected. A small folding saw, a hammer, a paper of nails. "You don't have to," she started. He was already measuring the first joist with his eye. She set the children to shelling the dried corn she'd found in the cellar, and she built a fire in the outdoor ring, and she started the cornmeal going, and while the food cooked and the children chattered, and the light went gold, and then amber, and then the first pale grey of evening, She listened to the steady rhythm of a hammer on the other side of what remained of the roof. He worked until the light was nearly gone. He came down and washed his hands at the pump and accepted the bowl she handed him without ceremony, and he sat on the porch step, the step that no longer tilted dangerously, she noticed, because he had fixed that too, sometime in the last hour without mentioning it, and he ate. The children were settled. The cellar had pallets and a lantern. Goldie sat on the porch step at the other end from Cassius and wrapped her hands around her own ball. "The roof isn't finished," he said. "I can see that. I'll finish it tomorrow." She looked at the side of his face. The prairie dark was coming in from the east, soft and immense, full of crickets. And then? He was quiet for a moment, not the quiet of a man avoiding the question, but the quiet of a man being honest with himself before he spoke. "I've got no fixed place," he said. "Haven't in a while. This land's good. The well's good." He paused. "If you're willing." She thought about 41 days. She thought about the weight of the basket, and the arm over the rough patch, and the body placed between her children and the men on the cut-off trail. She thought about the survey office and the quiet questions he'd asked before he ever showed his face. "You planned this," she said, "all of it." "Saw what was needed," he said. "That's not the same as planning." "Maybe not." She watched a pair of nighthawks cut across the lost light above the ridge. The crickets were very loud. "The children will want to know what to call you," she said finally. He turned and looked at her. In the near dark his face was all plains and quiet, and his eyes held that same steady quality that had undone her in front of the Mercantile, the total absence of demand. "Cassius suits fine," he said. She looked back at the nighthawks. "All right, Cassius." Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "Roof first, then we'll see." He nodded once. Inside the root cellar the lantern was still glowing, casting soft light up through the open hatch. She could hear the children breathing themselves towards sleep, the small sounds of settling, a sigh, a murmur, the rustle of a blanket being pulled closer. On the porch by the door, 2 small pairs of boots sat side by side on the boards he had repaired without telling her. Goldie looked at them for a long moment. Then she picked up her bowl and finished her supper, and the prairie dark settled in around the claim like something that had finally decided to stay.